You know this bass line. 4 notes, that's all it takes. It's played in stadiums, sampled in hip-hop, hummed by people who couldn't name a single other Queen song. Another one bites the dust. It became the biggest-selling single Queen ever released in America, their #1, the song that conquered a country that rock bands from England were supposed to struggle in. But here is what nobody tells you. Freddie Mercury didn't write it. The man who wrote Queen's greatest American hit was the one member of the band most people can't even picture, the quiet one, the bassist who barely spoke in interviews, who stood at the back, who seemed almost embarrassed to be famous. And the song he wrote very nearly tore the band's own fans in two. This is the story of how the shyest man in Queen changed everything, and how one phone call from the most famous person on earth made it happen.
To understand this, you have to meet John Deacon. If you picture Queen, you picture Freddie out front, arms raised, owning 80,000 people. You picture Brian May and his wild hair and his homemade guitar. You might even picture Roger Taylor behind the drums. And then there's the fourth one, the bassist, the one your eye slides past. John Deacon joined Queen last, the final piece, a quiet electronics student who almost didn't fit in with 3 enormous personalities. He hated interviews, he rarely gave them. While the others performed, even when the cameras were off, John stayed still, watchful, private. But here's the thing about the quiet one in any room. People mistake silence for having nothing to say. John Deacon had an engineer's mind and a musician's ear, and while everyone was watching Freddie, he was quietly listening to something the rest of the band wasn't. He was listening to funk.
It was 1980, and John had become obsessed. Not with rock, with the sound coming out of the dance clubs of New York, with the bands who could make a groove so tight it physically moved a room. Above all, with a group called Chic and their record Good Times, built on a bass line so hypnotic it had taken over the world. The story goes that John spent time around those musicians, studying how they did it, how a bass could be the entire song instead of just holding it up. And then he sat down and wrote 4 notes, a bass line that walked, that stalked, that dug into your chest and refused to leave. It owed a clear debt to that funk and disco sound, and John knew it. He built a whole song on top of it, spare and menacing, almost nothing but that bass and a beat and space. Then he brought it to a hard rock band and said, "This is what we should do next." You can imagine how that landed.
Because in 1980, this was close to heresy. Queen were a rock band, guitars, opera, bombast, and John Deacon was proposing they release a funk song, a disco-flavored dance floor song. You have to understand what disco meant to rock fans at that exact moment. This was the era of disco sucks, when American rock crowds literally burned disco records in a stadium. The genres were at war, and here was Queen's quiet bassist calmly suggesting they walk across the front line. Even inside the band, it was a gamble. Brian May's guitar, the thing that defined Queen's sound, is barely there on the track. It's John's song, John's bass, John's vision, and it asks the loudest band in the world to get quiet and let a groove do the work. It could have been a disaster, a rock band chasing a trend, alienating the fans who built them. It might never have been a single at all, if it weren't for who happened to hear it.
Because Queen had a fan in a very high place, Michael Jackson. In 1980, Jackson was becoming the most famous person on the planet, and he was a genuine admirer of Queen and a friend of Freddie's. He came to their shows. And at some point, he heard Another One Bites the Dust. And Michael Jackson, who understood a hit better than almost anyone alive, reportedly told them directly, "That's the one, release it as a single." Think about how unlikely this is. The band's biggest American hit was written by their quietest member, in a genre their fans hated, and pushed out into the world on the advice of the king of pop. Without that nudge, the band might have left it as an album track, a strange experiment buried on a record. Instead, on Michael Jackson's word, they put it out as a single. And it did something no Queen song had ever done before.
It crossed over. Another One Bites the Dust didn't just climb the charts, it went to #1 in America and stayed there for 3 weeks. And it did it by reaching an audience Queen had never truly reached before. It played in the dance clubs, it played on Black American radio stations, on funk and soul stations that had never touched a Queen record. Audiences who thought they had no interest in a British rock band were dancing to John Deacon's bassline without even knowing whose song it was. It became, by some measures, the best-selling single in the band's entire history. The Quiet One, the bassist you couldn't pick out of a photograph, had just handed Queen the biggest hit of their American lives and opened a door to a whole world of listeners the band's rock image had kept firmly shut. For a moment, it looked like a total triumph. And then the other side of the gamble arrived, because a lot of Queen's original fans felt betrayed. To the rock purists who had followed them from the beginning, this was a sellout. Queen, the band of guitar solos and mock opera, chasing the disco money. Some of them turned on the song and on the band. Queen spent that period caught between two worlds. Too rock for the dance crowd to fully claim, too pop and too funk for the rock crowd to forgive. It's a strange place for a band to be after making the biggest hit of their career. But sit with the irony of it. The member who caused all of it was the one who never asked for attention, never courted controversy, never wanted the spotlight for a second. John Deacon didn't set out to start a fight about what Queen was allowed to be. He just wrote a bass line he believed in and quietly refused to let the band play it safe. The loudest argument in Queen's career was started by its quietest man. And that quiet never really left him. John Deacon kept doing this. He wrote more of Queen's biggest hits than people realize, love songs and grooves that became enormous, always staying in the background while Freddie took the world's eye. He seemed to prefer it that way. And Another One Bites the Dust outgrew all of them anyway. It became eternal. It plays at every sporting event on earth. It's been sampled, covered, parodied, borrowed by hip-hop, woven so deep into culture that most people have no idea it was ever a Queen song at all, let alone one written by the shy man at the back. And when Freddie died in 1991, John Deacon did the most John Deacon thing imaginable. He grieved, he played a few final times, and then he simply walked away. He retired from music completely, stepped out of public life, and stayed there. The quietest member left the most quietly of all. He gave the world one of the most recognizable songs ever recorded, and then chose silence.
So the next time those 4 notes kick in and a whole stadium starts to move without being told to, listen for who's really there. Not the front man, not the showman, the quiet one at the back, the bassist whose name you had to be reminded of, who loved a groove enough to risk the whole band's identity on it, and was right. Freddie Mercury gave Queen their voice, but John Deacon gave them America, with 4 notes and the nerve to play something no one expected. He proved that the person who says the least in the room is sometimes the one who changes everything. If you'd like to hear the real stories behind the songs you've thought you already knew, stay with us. There's a whole catalogue of them, and every single one hides someone you overlooked. The next time you listen, ask yourself who really wrote the song you're dancing to.